and welcome to the latest session of the Knowledge Academy, in which we're going to discuss the art of business resilience. My name is John Meakin. I'm a Chief Information Security Officer of about 30 years experience in large corporate businesses spread across a number of market sectors, including oil and gas, banking, pharmaceuticals, and retail. So what are we going to talk about today? First of all, I think the term business resilience, although it's used a lot in common currency in business today and in technical and risk management pursuits, it deserves a little bit of definition. So I'm going to talk about what I mean by business resilience and how I think it is relevant to the way we do business today. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about some practical steps that will take this concept of business resilience and make it work in practice in the sorts of businesses that I've worked in, and hopefully you have too. I'll then illustrate these approaches with some real-life examples from my own experience, and in particular emphasize the importance of intelligence, real-time data in supporting a coherent business resilience strategy. And then finally, I will leave you with some top tips, which hopefully will help you continue or even begin your journey in the matter of making your business more resilient. So what is business resilience then? The UK financial services regulators have made great play of the need for business resilience in their sector in the last few years, and not the least as a reaction to some of the disruption the world experienced from the financial crash those years ago. Their definition defines business resilience as the ability of business and the sector as a whole to prevent, adapt, respond, recover, and learn from operational disruptions. Now, for me, that is a fair statement you can apply to the goals of any of the risk management pursuits, which you'll see illustrated on the slide here today. So what is it that is uniquely different about business resilience? Well, there's part of it which is in the resilience, the R word, which is about continuing to operate. But of course, that is the goal of all risk management. But I think hidden behind that is the concept that actually you are going to experience these risks. So it's the ability to manage your way through the experience of the risk. So there's an extent to which the avoidance of risk is de-emphasized. But I think most importantly for me, it's the concept that this is covering all types of risks. This is making your business resilient to all types of risks that it may experience over time, including these headings on the slide here. It's bringing them all together into a coherent approach, and it's addressing what I think is a truism of risk experienced by business, particularly today, and I'll come on to examples of this, which is that these risks can form a cascade where one experience of realization of risk links to other risks which are triggered either by the same circumstances that caused the first risk or indeed from a realization of that first risk. So a resilience approach to risk is a joined up approach. It needs to be joined up both before, during, and indeed after the disruption. The regulators, after all, cite learning from risks as part of their definition. And I think the traditional approaches to risk management have rather dealt with these individual risk areas and the others that aren't listed here as stovepipes, dealt with differently. And I think tackling the business resilience challenge for me is about breaking through the walls of those stovepipes. So the increasingly global nature of business means that risks are more likely, as time goes on, to cascade from one risk, either as a trigger or from the same causes, to another risk across these traditional boundaries. And risks can spread just more extensively, and indeed in some cases more quickly, more rapidly across businesses, because of the global nature of business today, because of the intricate and very long interconnected supply chains that we have that spread across industries and across geographies. So again, resilience, meeting that resilience goal today has to be about breaking down boundaries, traditional boundaries. So separate identification and measurement of risks in each segment of risk management and separate treatment is not sufficient. Resilience in today's world demands an holistic approach. So how do you go about embarking on this journey from perhaps the more traditional approach to risk management where you might be today, or maybe you're more advanced, but how do you pursue the journey towards this joined up approach that gives you a resilient business in the end? I think first of all, there are certain key characteristics of a good business resilience approach, which are that the focus is across those relevant risk types. For each risk, the focus is on external, systemic, and supply chain risk contributions, as well as the risk that is self-generated in your business. There's a key focus on recovery, and there's a focus on testing and improvement. Testing and improvement. It's an evolution, in other words. The approach to managing risks in a business resilience framework is an evolutionary and continuous improvement approach to risk. So the first step in achieving those characteristics is to take your existing risk management disciplines, layer those characteristics across them, and develop out of that a joined up strategy to achieve management of those risks together towards that business resilience approach. Now that might sound a bit simplistic, but again, coming from a world where I believe different types of risk, and I can talk very much about cybersecurity risk, where it has been seen as different. It has been dealt with differently. It's been dealt with in a stovepipe. And there aren't that many risk management strategies I've seen in corporate businesses in my time, which cite risk in the cyberspace alongside other very different forms of business risk, risks in supply chains, risks in logistics, risks on the physical side, risks that are financial. So building that strategy, providing the template, if you like, for beginning to break down those stovepipes of risk management is a key part of this. I think the second stage on a practical way of making this work is to ignite collaboration between all of the stakeholders in risk within the business, whether they're specialists or indeed, frontline business managers. Talk is always good. Workshopping the risk scenarios with a view to seeing beyond the boundaries of the traditional stovepipe definitions of each component risk is really important to see the joins between the risks, to see those cascades of risks, which you need to be able to protect against if you're going to have a resilient business. So working through your organization, talking about the risk scenarios, collaborating between the different parties, particularly the risk specialists, and identifying out of that very tangibly the key failure scenarios. In the same way as within each stovepipe for years, we've been identifying the key risks, and putting them on a heat map. Here you're combining those heat maps, if you like, not with just a mess of multiple risks represented by their impact and likelihood coordinates, but actually a number of joined up risk scenarios listed by impact and likelihood. The third stage in this is to make sure that in evolving that discussion in the light of the overall strategy you have, that you are allowing for a measurement of the progress you're making and what the target is for each of those risk scenarios. Now, again, this sounds like, teaching grandmaster suck eggs. Of course you would do that, but identifying the measurements for the more complicated failure scenarios, which you need to tackle in order to make your business resilient, is a non-trivial exercise, but you can't duck it. You need to be able to measure, to be able to, first of all, define the tests which will prove that you've made a difference, made your business more resilient, let alone to measure your progress on a journey. And it will be a journey because it won't all be right first time. So you need to measure, you need to test. And of course, if you're doing this across the traditional disciplines, you need to make sure that out of that collaborative effort, you've developed a common method and actually a common language which breaks down the typically different terminology that's been used historically by risk managers in those different stovepipe disciplines. When it comes to the testing of those scenarios, the first scenarios that you define and that you test and you define measurements for will not be right. It isn't that simple. If it were, we'd all be perfect. None of our businesses would fail. We wouldn't be subject to unexpected risks. Of course, they'll fail the first time, but that's the whole point of testing, to test to fail so that you know what to improve. So that is key to this journey. And the final stage in all of this, of course, based on those metrics, is to set some goals for improvement. And those are leading down from the goals that you set out in the original strategy that I've already called out. And those goals need to be sanctioned all the way up your business to be the right ones, actually, to make the right impact on your business and to make sure that the resilience that you're building by exploring these failure scenarios actually gets built into the frontline business processes, so it will actually be resilient when the worst comes to the worst in whatever actual real life scenario occurs. So that maybe is a fairly high level, simple approach, but is this all real? I mean, is this us worrying about something that may never happen, if you like? Well, I think I can cite one very easy and one very particular real life experience from my own and to some extent all of our shared pasts, which very clearly illustrates the ability of risks to cascade and the importance, therefore, of taking an holistic view to risk in pursuit of business resilience. So for me, a key lesson arose back in April 2010. I was the Chief Information Security Officer at BP at the time, and we had a terrible disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. The Macondo drilling rig, you can see illustrated on the slide, failed. The well seal failed. The rig exploded because the release of volatile petroleum products, and people were killed. It was a disaster by any measure of the imagination. And of course, what then ensued is many millions of barrels of oil leaking out of the uncapped well into the Gulf of Mexico and polluting the Gulf of Mexico shore. And this was a life-changing and a business-changing event for many, many people. And we, in trying to address the recovery, if you like, from that scenario, experienced real cascades, unexpected cascades of risk. So in the cybersecurity part of the business, we had been monitoring, as we would do, for the development of threats to the IT, the electronic information of the business. Initially, we would seem very far away from the explosion of a rig in the Gulf of Mexico. And by the way, there's no link between cyber risk and the occurrence of that explosion. However, in our monitoring, we began to began to realize from chatter on the web that partly as a result of this occurrence, we were now being targeted by hackers with a cause, hacktivists as we call them, who, because of the ecological impact of the disaster, were now seeing BP as a target. And we were being targeted, and seriously targeted, with a variety of attacks that, in their biggest impact, were in danger of knocking out certain key systems facing the internet, including key systems that actually were the method whereby the reprovisioning of the very large worldwide network of petrol gas stations that BP has across the world, those being gas stations being reprovisioned with petroleum products through these internet-facing systems. The danger was those systems were going to be knocked out. The danger was that the impact on BP would spread internally, and the impact would have a real impact out there in the outside world. Fortunately, detecting this early, we were able to take certain action, but we had to take that action in the context of the recovery of all sorts of other parts of BP's business. So this was, for me, a true example of risks spreading, risks cascading, and a true example of the need for a joined up approach to recovering from risk scenarios which are complex, joined up, multi-triggered, multi-impact. So moving right up to date, we've all been experiencing the pandemic for a long time now. I think particularly in this phase of the pandemic, where we've been through a number of waves of infection, we've been through a number of strict lockdowns, releases from lockdown, we are seeing unexpected behavior in large, complicated global systems, such as the supply chains that we're all dependent on. We're seeing unexpected impacts on business, unexpected impacts on our daily lives. I think for those who sit in government and are trying to preserve the operation of national economies, I think they will understand in their bones now the need for and the complexity behind resilient national business. And I think there are many of our own businesses who are experiencing, in a smaller way, the impacts, the complicated impacts of this virus pandemic. So for me, the need is real. I think in my own direct experience of the pandemic, business that I've been working with moved to mass home working in the first lockdown. We were lucky and we'd had a degree of forethought about how to enable moving, from 5 to 10% home working to 95% home working. We'd set up the technical mechanisms. But when you move call center operations, for example, from call center locations, central locations to home working, you need to provision greater, more sophisticated technology. And what did we run into? We ran into the downturn in the supply of that technology because of the shortage of chips, the shortage of manufacture, the increased demand for computers, etc. So again, lack of resilience through a lack of understanding of cascading risks. So what about leaving you then with some key tips to respond to these challenges of today's dangerous world? I think whatever you believe of my rather high-level exposition of how you structure your journey to improvement, I think 4 key things to really bear in mind as you go through it. First of all, get the language right. Language is often a cause of a barrier between us humans, and that applies to risk managers as many as other variants of the species. And getting the right language between the various traditional or pre-existing somewhat stovepipe disciplines so that those stovepipes can begin to be broken down is really, very important. Agreeing on the methods and the metrics, which is really what's behind a prerequisite, if you like, for doing the testing, and the testing will drive learning and improvement. But agreeing on the methods, how are you identifying the risk scenarios? How are you identifying the joins between cascading risks? And how are you going about measuring so you can see the improvement from the testing? Get that right. Third tip, don't get distracted by the organization. I've lived through a number of waves of evolution of risk management in large corporates in my time across the scale of those corporates. And I've seen many of those attempts to link together disparate risks, even before business resilience, which have got bogged down in organizational change. You do not need to build a business resilience organization. You simply need the existing stakeholders to talk better to each other and to collaborate effectively. It may be for your particular organization that will result in a reorganization and a bringing together organizationally of hitherto disparate disciplines, but don't get bogged down in that. You will waste time. And then finally, really get serious about measurement, get serious about the metrics, and sweat those metrics, first of all, to improve the method, and then secondly, to improve the actual resilience mechanisms that you need to be a resilient business. So I hope some of that has made some sense to you today. I thank you very much for listening to me. And I'd like to sign off by reminding you that the Knowledge Academy, with the theme of rethinking risk, is there. It's there for you to refer to. And hopefully you'll be able to build your understanding and build your business towards a more resilient future through that. Thank you very much.